formally introduce you to the latest in our Sunset series of Morecambe Bay Partnership presentations. I'm Tom, I'm the chair at Morecambe Bay Partnership, and I have chaired most of these. I haven't done all of them since we started, but it's really, really lovely to see you all for our first one of this autumn and winter season. I hope you all had a brilliant summer, and yeah, hopefully you'll be able to join us for a few of these as we settle in, as the nights are drawing in, and we're spending time back inside our homes, kind of reconnecting with each other and with the work of Morecambe Bay Partnership through this Zoom series. So just as a reminder, I guess, for everyone, that these grew out of really while we were going through lockdown, and a lot of our work at Morecambe Bay Partnership, obviously involves education and community activity, volunteer projects, citizen-led archaeology, and all sorts of things. So much of it's face-to-face, and we weren't able to do that through the pandemic. So rather than just stopping it, we thought, well, let's see if we can bring some of it online, so at least we can see you. We always say that Morecambe Bay Partnership is not just our staff, it's not just our partners, it's our volunteers, but also all our supporters, because we are only an entity because of all of you out there, and we wanted a way to keep in touch with you, but also to keep our educational programs going, and a way of in some cases recruiting volunteers who could go out on their own and get involved in some of our work, rather than it being a sort of group-led activity. So we started running this series, really looking and shining a bit of a spotlight, opening up the box of everything we do across nature and access, arts, storytelling, and obviously heritage as well. So we've had talks about built heritage and archaeology, recent history, ancient history, and the talk tonight from Dan Elsworth is part of the heritage work stream that we focus on here at Morecambe Bay Partnership. As I think you all know, we're a relatively small charity, but making big things happen around Morecambe Bay. And really, if it's something that makes Morecambe Bay special, then it's something that we want to be involved in. And whether that's celebrating what's special, or whether it's actually helping to conserve some of our special features. And obviously, the thing that makes us particularly special is the way in which we involve you in the work that we do. The theme of tonight is really linked into the fact that it's the slightly misnamed Heritage Open Day, which I think these days lasts for 2 weeks, doesn't it? Heritage Open Days now, but it's where people, organizations, places all around the country are opening up places that you wouldn't be normally able to get to, just to help us to sort of reveal, I guess, some of the secrets of our past all around the country. This evening, we're going to hear from Dan, and Dan Elsworth's been working as an archaeologist in this area for well over 30 years, 30 years sort of semi-professionally, and then 22 years professionally, working for Greenlane Archaeology for the last 15 years. And one of the things that I think will become very, very clear as we listen to Dan is his massive love for the history of this area, just like all of you are interested, and Dan's managed to turn that into a career. And we were talking just before the start, and he was saying that there's an enormous number of professional archaeologists of considerable standing who all come from Ulverston. So there's obviously something in the water there in Ulverston that breeds archaeologists. So thank you very much, Dan. And I think we're all very excited to hear what you've got to say about your life as a commercial archaeologist.
Believe it or not, given how many talks I often give in a year, I've managed to avoid giving a Zoom talk for the entire sort of last 2 years of lockdown, which is quite surprising, really. Claire asked if I'd give a talk on something about the archaeology of the area, and I just kind of came up with one that I'd given before and then added some more slides on the end of it. So if it ends up being far too long, I apologise. I'll do my best to rein it in. I'm going to speak particularly about the work that I do as a commercial archaeologist, and I use the word commercial archaeologist because the idea of archaeologists being commercial and making any kind of money is fairly hilarious. But anyway, it is what I do for a living. Most of the work I do is to do with planning, and luckily enough, because I'm working in the area, I'm mainly dealing with stuff in this part of the world, so I'm able to make it even more topical. I'm able to do it specifically on the Furness and Carmel area is what I've gone for in the end, just to make it a bit more local. Most of the work we do is not anything like what you'll see on TV or what you'll see on, any kind of TV programs or anything like that. We rarely work with any kind of treasure, except sometimes we do. We dug on the site of the the Furness Hoard, which I'm sure many of you know and will have seen in the Dock Museum. And that's us digging away on the site, basically emptying out the hole that the metal detectors had left behind, not finding anything else of any interest. We don't tend to work with celebrities. Obviously, there's a lot of TV archaeology around. There's Time Team as they were, which is about to be resurrected, apparently. We don't tend to work with celebrities, except occasionally we do. And that's us working at Coniston. When the only time they ever dug in Cumbria when I was able to go and work with them was at Coniston. And the chap in the check shirt in front is another Ulverstonian archaeologist who worked on Time Team and worked for Wessex Archaeology. So what do we do? Well, most of the work we do deals with extremely boring bits of paper like this, planning guidance, planning notes, planning documents, which I will not talk about because they're really, really dull, which basically leads to us going and getting involved in development sites, building projects, housing estates, whatever you like. And most of the sites that I'll talk about are things where there's been something that was being built, which has, obviously massively changed the landscape and required archaeologists to go and intervene and get involved, and then we go in and do the work. And I'm specifically going to talk about projects in the Barrow area, and then I'll expand it a bit to the kind of wider Furness area. So, start off with the project we did now, one of the earliest ones we did as Greenlane Archaeology in about 2006 or 7, which was for a massive site in Barrow where they built the B&Q and a few other big shopping developments. And it was actually originally quite an industrial heartland of the town, or not the stuff you'd think of anyway. So the first part of the work we did was look at documents, old maps and plans. I can't put a pointer on. Oh, can you see that? I don't know if you can see the cursor. The area we were looking
at, we can see that.
Yeah, it was broadly along there and down this up to the coal mill there. So it's quite a big area, a large area to be looking at. And as you can see, we immediately looking at the maps, knew it had an iron and brass foundry on it, the steam coal mill and the gasworks. Now, gasworks, archaeologically, not something you want to go messing with, but the rest of it's all right. And because of the date of what it is, they're all quite late. They all developed in the kind of peak of Barrow's growth in the 1860s and 70s. There's quite a lot of documentary information. There's the maps, there's photographs, there's other documents that tell us. And it was Waddington and Longbottom's iron and brass foundry, amongst the other things. That's the steam coal mill as it was in its early phase. So we knew quite a lot about what was going on there anyway from the documents. And there's photographs, of course, going right up to one day. And the coal mill building stood until about 1972 when it burnt down, suspiciously on November the 5th. Nothing suspicious about that. So we did a bit of initial work, watching them digging some holes, and it soon became very apparent underneath this massive concrete floor, there was quite well-preserved building remains. You can see walls and concrete floors and all kinds of things turning up very, very early on at this stage. So we ended up going back. First of all and recording some buildings that were still standing on the site. One of the other things we do a lot of is building recording buildings that are going to be demolished. Anyone who knows this part of Barrow, it's off Pinepool Road. These buildings were still standing until 15 years ago and have been standing there a long time. They're used as a garage and other things. And so we do a lot of work recording buildings that have gone, obviously now since gone. And that's part of the interior of the rope walk that was there, which was originally a huge long building that was only a tiny bit left. And this produces a big plan of the buildings. That's the buildings that were still standing. So the rope walk was up at this end, and then these are all parts of the iron and brass foundry. Nice long big section. Not a very good picture, but yeah, the idea. Oops. And a lot of archaeology you'll see on TV is these really glamorous looking sites. Lots of nice open fields, somewhere nice and green, probably quite warm. You know, quite pleasant. It's probably down south somewhere, you know, somewhere nice and easy to dig. And the kind of places we end up working are these hideous industrial wastelands that are covered in broken concrete and bits of iron sticking out all over the place. So this is what the site looked like after they demolished the buildings and started clearing it. So we did a bit of watching brief while they're digging on this, and you can imagine watching this and working anything out is an absolute nightmare. But that's the kind of thing that you find, which is an underground culvert, and you're trying to make any sense of this is quite difficult. And usually you're digging in winter as well, so it's even more fun. There we go, there's winter. That's what winter digging on an industrial site in Barrow looks like. It's lovely. And then we went back subsequent to all of that and actually stripped the entire footprint of the steam corn mill, which is about 100 metres long and about 30 metres wide. And 3 of us dug that with a machine over several weeks and cleared the entire thing. And there we are digging away, again, in winter. And that's what the final building looked like. So that was the whole footprint of the corn mill we managed to clear. In fact, that's the only example of a steam corn mill that's ever been excavated fully in the entire world, as far as I'm aware, which is quite something. And to give you some sense of scale, the machine on the top, at the top there, the spoil heap that it sat on is about the size of a row of terrace houses. So it was an immense site with an immense amount of material coming off it. And that's the other end of the building with the boiler rooms. This is all the boiler rooms, and the chimney was up here and everything kind of linked together. So it's a huge site that developed over a long period of time. We produced a great big report which outlined all the phasing, how it developed, how the site grew and how it expanded. I brought it all together, and that's actually published in the Cumberland and Westmoreland transactions in 2010. So you can read all about it in there if you want more information, which is probably online for free now. And they got a bit obsessed with bricks on this site because there were lots of different bricks, almost all of which made by this chap, William Gradwell, who was responsible for building virtually everything in Barrow at one time. And his bricks were turning up all over the place. So moving on to another site in Barrow that some of you will know, because you drive past it all the time when you're coming in. The main road into Barrow is on this side here. Kimberley Scott, the paper manufacturer, is about here somewhere, and you can see that. This is the old Sowerby Hall, and the current Sowerby Hall farm is here. The old Sowerby Hall farm was there. And this was another one where we did some building recording. And Sowerby Hall, the barn at Sowerby Hall, which is still standing, hasn't been touched since we did this work. This is absolutely incredible. What we assumed was medieval barn. And we did the full record of it because they wanted to convert it into housing and they wanted to do various things to it. So we fully recorded it. All sorts of interesting bits and pieces in it. Pieces of reused stone from Furness Abbey all over the place. Really, really nice trusses like you just saw. And we actually managed to get some funding afterwards for some dendrochronology dating. We got that done on the timbers in the roof, and they all actually came back at about 1610, 1620. So it's actually after the dissolution. And we've seen this on a few sites now where there's examples of buildings that we assume were medieval, and actually when we get the dates, they're actually later. They're actually post-dissolution, so there seems to be a huge amount of rebuilding in the after dissolution, where they were clearly, and Bill knows about this, where they were clearly making use of the woodland and exploiting what had been monastic woodland and building new buildings all over the place. But building recording is something we do quite a lot of, and that's the plan of the buildings. There's actually the main barn, a modern, a later edition, various later editions, and then another building over the side of the other side of the yard. So it's not all, it's really not all digging work. In fact, probably 50% of our time is spent doing things that aren't digging, that are desk-based work, building, recording, surveys, and similar kind of work. We have to do all kinds of things. It's never the same one week to the next. Another building that you'll be familiar with if you know Barrow at all is the 2 buildings that are next to the Duke of Edinburgh Hotel at the top end of Abbey Road, which we recorded for the Barrow Borough Council when they were doing their programme of renovation work, 102 and 104 Abbey Road. These are the drawings. Actually, the whole thing was designed in one block by the borough surveyor, by a chap called Howard Evans, in 1875. And this end is the hotel. There's my cursor. That's the hotel end, and this is the 2 shops, 102 and 104. But what was interesting is when we looked at the actual buildings, they don't really match these plans. They obviously didn't quite build it to the plans as they originally submitted them. And one of the great things about Barrow is that a lot of the buildings being this late, there's actually a full set of plans, the original plans in the archives. So if you want to look up a building that's post about 1875, the chances are the original drawings will be in the archives. So you virtually there's no point recording them, you might as well go look at the plans. And this is the interior, so it had been used for various things. And by the time we got there, it was very run down, very poor condition. This is the cellar with these fairly impressive Gothic arched supports. This is one of the rooms upstairs. I originally had this amazing panelling just lying in pieces on the floor. And it had a nice stone fireplace. And then these are the drawings that we produced. So we did full elevations of one of the buildings, plans of everything, and descriptions of everything as well, and photographs. And the recording we do extends to all kinds of things. We got a rather unusual request again from Barrow Council. Having done the work we've done before, could we produce elevation drawings of the town hall? And I said, oh yeah, that'll be fine, no problem, dead easy, if we can do that. I know a guy who's got a camera on a pole, he can take all the photographs and make all the pictures, and then we can just draw them up from that. And I budgeted a very, very small amount of time. And of course, I hadn't taken into account that if you look at Barrow Town Hall, the stonework in the walls is this very, very irregular. It's not in even courses, it's all up and down all over the place. And it took about 10 times as long to draw up as a result as I thought it would. So I had to basically go back to them cap in hand and say, can we have some more money, please? Because it took far longer to do this than I thought it would. These are the photographs. These were taken by Adam Stanford, who I'm sure some of you probably know of, who runs Aerial Cam. He does high-level photography and drone photography. And from these nowadays, you can produce these amazing elevation pictures, which are hugely detailed by producing a collage of all the photographs. And from those, we were able to produce drawings. And so we produced these stone-by-stone drawings of the entire building, which now I think about it, seems absolutely insane, really, but we did manage to do it. And this was so that the town council could look at maintenance works on the building and work out where they need to do repairs and mark up some detailed drawings. Not something I want to do again, though, because it took absolutely ages. And again, another industrial site in Barrow, and you'll notice an industrial theme at the beginning of this. We did some work on the site. Where's my cursor gone? It is. This area here, which, as you can see, is marked as Shipbuilding Yard. Obviously, in Barrow, there were several shipbuilding yards. It wasn't just one big one. There was lots of smaller ones and lots of other industries associated with it, sawmills, other structures and buildings that were associated with shipbuilding scattered about the place. This was going to be all redeveloped for housing. So we went and looked at the buildings that were on the site, looked at the maps, and there's the buildings. Not very exciting. It becomes Strand Engineering Works later on. The buildings don't look like very much, but they are actually all part of the original shipbuilding yard. And these are all small buildings associated with the shipyard. Virtually the only ones left in town. They're not there now, obviously, they've gone now. Virtually the only ones left in town that related to this early shipbuilding on this kind of small scale. And these were all buildings that were used for the various stages of fitting out the ships, making the various parts and putting them together. And again, it's a fairly typical kind of thing. A chimney there from a blacksmith's kiln, fairly typical kind of late Victorian buildings, but now becoming increasingly rare and fewer of them left. And that was the interior of what had been Strand Engineering with this rather lovely wooden panelling on the walls. It was probably 1950s stuff. And of course, the town wasn't just shipbuilding, even from an early age. An early date, Barrow was actually an important railway town, and the huge Furness Railway Works were one of the major employers for a long time. This is obviously, again, basically no longer there anymore. It's absolutely a huge complex. You can see the size of it on this Ordnance Survey map. This is a plan from, I think, 1903, which shows the various stages of the works and the various bits that went on, and the whole point about whether making and repairing the machine, the railway engines. And this shows the process in which they went through the machine shop and the different parts and how they were built and worked. But this was an immense complex. That shows you the photograph of the buildings. This was the offices. Oops, right, I'll go back now, and all the other buildings. The only bit surviving was this tiny chunk in the middle, which is quite a nice looking building, but was in an appalling condition, and had been used as a garage for a long time. And we recorded this in two phases. The initial phase in 2010, and then they went back again about 10 years later because they were trying to evict one of the tenants from the site. And so it was, literally just looking at the last remaining remnants of what had once been this immense complex. But quite impressive buildings. So these were buildings designed big enough to drive the railway engines actually inside them. And so, they had these enormous wide openings at the front. big louvered windows at the top to let the smoke and the steam out. Several phases of rebuilding. This was a 1920s edition that had been added on. And just remnants of the old office buildings and the nicer buildings, which were really nicely built, all sandstone, proper arches, but literally just parts of walls left and nothing else. And again, that's all gone now. It's all been cleared. This is all part of the marine development area, so it's all basically been cleared, which is a shame, because obviously if it's still been standing, it would have been quite a substantial and quite important structure. But unfortunately, a lot got demolished in the 60s and left in this kind of condition. That's us working on the inside, recording the various bits of the building. It's quite a late section there. And then we went back again a few years later to get into the last section that we couldn't get into originally, and just recorded the last bits. Again, that's just showing some detail of some bits and pieces. So this is part of the nicer bit with some internal plaster still left and the cornice there. And this is another, you can't really see that very well, but that's another workshop, oops, with the chimney in it. And this was the plan of what was left. So if you imagine that original photograph and that original plan, this is literally just the remnants of what was left. This is one wall with all the windows in, originally part of a much larger building. This whole area was filled with buildings that have just been left with this kind of stump, basically, of what was originally there. A real shame in terms of what the original place must have looked like. And again, another cross section that shows you the louvered roof with the in the bit in the roof to let the smoke and the steam out. And then we work out some phasing from that based on the various bits of information we've got, which tells us, we can work out quite a lot of things from the documentary sources and which bits are the earliest and how it all relates together and how everything kind of developed. But again, we're only looking at a patchy remnant of what was originally. So something very different. I'll move away from industrial things, as well as too many pictures of bricks. We did some work for the Cumbria Wildlife Trust in advance of habitat improvements on, it was North Walney mainly and Falmey Island initially. And this involved an initial phase of just having a look and seeing what was there, if anything, assessing the documentary sources, looking at various things. There's a nice picture of Walney, everyone knows that. And with this revealed a few bits and pieces. There's some eroding peats on Falmey Island, but not very much shows up on the surface. But we knew some of these areas had a lot of potential because plenty of prehistoric stuff has been washed out of the beach, especially on North Walney, over the years and been picked up. So they knew there was some potential. And the whole point of this work at North Walney in particular was they were trying to remove this invasive Japanese rose, which has very, very deep roots, and as we found, and it was potentially causing a lot of damage to the ground. They wanted to remove this, which was going to potentially involve digging a lot of the ground out and obviously destroying the archaeology in the process. This is the site as we went to look at the north end of Walney as it was. It's in this little kind of trough. This green stuff is all the Japanese rose, which at that point had been treated with a chemical to try and kill it off a bit, which is why it's not very big. So in order to assess what potential there was there, whether we'd find anything, whether there's anything that would be destroyed or not, we agreed rather optimistically to dig a load of test pits. And I thought, well, it's digging test pits, metre square test pits in sand. How hard can that be? I mean, that's not going to be difficult at all, is it? And so there we are. This was February on North Walney, which doesn't make it any easier. Although we were fairly lucky that the days we were there, it mainly didn't snow, so that was good, apart from one day. And we decided to dig these test pits over a kind of random grid pattern. And there we are digging the test pits. Only after about 4 days did they announce they had a gator that could have driven us up there. And so by that point, we'd been walking up there for an hour every day. Only at that point did we discover we could get a lift. I think the person who had the keys was on holiday. That was the problem. So we couldn't get access to their machine because they were on holiday and we couldn't get them to drive it up for us. The problem we discovered as well was that Japanese rose, not only does it have this quite tall structure above the surface when it's fully grown, it also has this incredibly matted root structure underneath the ground. So the first foot of every test pit was basically hacking through these roots, which are like, if you've ever dug through bracken, it's like digging through bracken, only worse. And it was hellishly difficult to dig through. This is where some rabbits have gone through it. So it took a lot longer to do than we thought it was going to. It was much harder going. And some of the pits ended up being 1 metre deep, which, you know, even in sand takes quite a lot of digging. In most of them, we didn't find a huge amount, to be honest. There's a lot of these levels of dark charcoal or soot or whatever it was, actually turned out to not be very old. And it turned out that most of the dune system had actually developed quite recently in the last 100 to 200 years. And that a lot of what was in there was probably Victorian. There was a lot of slag that had got in there that had actually floated, this slag like pumice stone that had actually floated off the slag banks on Walney, drifted across and ended up on the mainland, ended up on North Walney. So when we started finding this slag initially, we were quite excited, thinking it was something really old, and it turned out it wasn't old at all. It was just modern Victorian slag. In some of the pits, we did find these layers of rocks at the bottom, which is actually the prehistoric. That dark sand is actually the prehistoric habitation level, which is full of fire-cracked rocks, charcoal, bits of animal bone, a few bits of flint. We did find a few bits of flint, but not very many. And to be honest, for the amount of work that was involved, there was not a lot to shout about when you got to the end of it. That shows one of the pits, again, with this dark sand in the bottom of it. But at least we found there was something there. We proved there was something there. It wasn't very much to look at, but there was definitely something there. So in the end, I think they actually decided to preserve the archaeology by treating the weed with chemicals rather than digging it all out. And that's us actually surveying on Walney. It looked really nice there, but it was February, so it was pretty cold. And we came back one Monday and discovered all of our pegs had been pulled out by some naughty children or whoever. So that was not very helpful. And just to bring something slightly different again from outside of the Barrow area, and not industrial and not prehistoric. This is a building that many of you will know as you come into Ulverston down Dalton Gate. It's this curious little octagonal structure. It's Grade 2 listed, and it's described as a toll house. Now, the description of a toll house is on a plaque on the side of the building. It's listed as a toll house or a possible toll house, but it almost certainly isn't a toll house. We recorded this because somebody's got plans to try and renovate it and convert it into an annex for a new house they want to build nearby. So again, we did a full building recording of this, and it's a really interesting building. It's actually almost certainly a summer house for a much larger garden that ran down the hill and doesn't really exist anymore. Probably built in the late 18th century, but with quite distinctive or quite an impressive amount of architectural features inside. I mean, externally it's interesting enough, but fairly plain. Well, that's the plaque. Now, I'm not quite sure who's responsible for the plaque, or who's responsible for the information on the plaque, or where they got the information from the plaque. But none of it is true, as far as I'm aware. It seems to entirely be basically made up by somebody, because I didn't find any evidence to support any of these things at all. I won't read all that out, but if you want to read it, you can see it anyway. Internally, it had quite a lot of very nice these enormous arched alcoves on the ground floor, and then several smaller niches on the upper floors. And it seems to have been, and this rather nice fireplace. And it seems to have been quite an impressive, quite a fancy 18th century summer house for a large garden. Presumably all these niches had statues in or similar at one time. And I assume that the idea was that you paraded from your house into this summer house, sat there and took your tea, looking at the views from the summer house on the upper floor, while your servants brought you, scones and jam and all the rest of it from the main house. Unfortunately, in a terrible state now, because it's had years and years of not being used for anything, and water's got into it. But hopefully, the current owners do seem quite keen on renovating it sympathetically. So hopefully, we'll see some improvements soon. But it's going to be a fairly substantial job because it's in such a bad state and the roof's falling in and all sorts. And then again, something very, very different. I mean, the point about this talk really is that the work we do is never the same from one week to the next. I mean, it's completely different all the time, and we rarely have any kind of sense of doing something for very long before you're moving on to the next completely different project. And the worst thing in the world is when people say to me, "What's the most interesting thing you found?" or "What's the best thing you found recently?" And I can't remember usually because the last project I did is finished. I moved on to the next one. I'm already thinking about the one following that, and I've forgotten what the last thing was. And everything is so different, you kind of struggle to remember what one site was from the next because you move on to the next one so quickly. This, some of you might recognise this already anyway. This is Carmel Priory Church. This is the churchyard on the north side of the churchyard, where they're talking about adding an extension onto the church to provide more modern facilities, which a lot of churches are doing now, obviously. Obviously, one of the problems with that is it's into the churchyard. Carmel Priory is a very historically very important place. Obviously, it's a medieval priory from the late 12th century with lots of potential alterations. There might even be something there before that. We don't really know for certain. There was certainly a parish church somewhere nearby beforehand. We know we're in the graveyard there. But the other issue with Carmel Priory, as any of you know a bit about the history of the site, is that the cloister of the original priory was thought to have been moved from the south side to the north side in about the 14th century. Now, the evidence for this is a bit sketchy. There's not really any decent documentary evidence. It's mainly based on features within the building that various people have identified. So obviously, one of the things we were thinking we might find is some evidence for this cloister having been on this side originally, or just anything, medieval would be worthwhile telling us. In the event, we found a lot of features, but not many of them were medieval. There was a hell of a lot of work had been done around that side in the 19th century, and what's quite shocking, really. I mean, nowadays, if you want to dig a churchyard up, there's all kinds of rules about what you can and can't do. It's all very heavily carefully controlled and respectful and all the rest of it. We discovered actually that in the late 19th century, when they'd done one of the various phases of work to the church, they dug these enormous ditches around the side of the church, probably to act as sort of soakaways to help with drainage. And in amongst that with probably and just levelling things off as well and getting rid of rubble from the church building, they just dumped everything they could find in these enormous holes in the ground, including human skulls, bones, bits of coffins, coffin plates, all kinds of things. And I mean, the most shocking thing really was a coffin plate from a 6-month-old child that had just been chucked back in with the rubbish. And in one pit there were 3 or 4 just complete skulls just sitting there in amongst all this rubble. Amazing, really, that you think of the Victorians as being quite sort of prim and proper and correct, and obviously they didn't really think anything of just throwing things back into a hole in the ground and covering it up again. However, what we did find were, and it's quite hard to get good photographs because everything was so loose, it all kept falling in. And again, this was conveniently in December, just before Christmas, so it was really not the best time to be on site doing anything. What we did find, it's not easy to see in this picture, was a couple of very, very straight-sided cuts. You can just about see that edge there. We couldn't get to the bottom because it was so loose. These very, very straight-sided features. One in that one. And that's the top of another one before we'd excavated it. You can see that line of dark material coming across there. 2 of these very, very straight-sided features. Nothing in them, completely empty of any kind of finds, of any kind of structure or anything, but very, very vertical, very straight-sided. And when you look at them in the plan, the one in that last photograph is this thing here, and the other one is in this bit here. What I think they are, or what we kind of concluded they are, is wall footings for stone walls that have been completely robbed, completely removed, and they've removed all the stone and dug everything out again and just left the holes in the ground. And I suspect, although I can't prove it, that they are actually the walls of the cloister as it was moved to this side of the building, and that's one going across that way, probably came around like that, and then at a bit of an angle against that wall, went down again to make this uneven cloister around this area. Which, if that's the case, then that does actually kind of fit fairly well with this idea that the cloister was moved to the north side of the church at a later date. But we couldn't date them very well, and we can't be absolutely certain because there was no structural remains in them anymore. And we didn't find any flaws or anything else that would help. But we have done quite a lot of work in Carmel. I mean, Carmel's probably one of the places we do as much work as we do anywhere else, to be honest, because obviously most of the village is built inside the old priory. Virtually every time you do any kind of building work in Carmel, you find something, and Carmel is now full of people with lots of money who want to build houses everywhere. So, and there's a lot of people there trying to cram houses into not very much space, and resulting in archaeological work happening. So it is very interesting, and we are building up over various projects quite a good idea of what's happening in Carmel now, and bits and pieces of information about how the whole place developed. which is proving quite useful. And then just to get to some real archaeology, because I kind of feel like I've tricked you all into sitting through a talk where you just looked at pictures of bricks for 10 minutes and then pictures of trenches with not very much in them for 10 minutes. Because the nature of a lot of the work that we do is that we often go out on sites and we don't really find very much. That is unfortunately the truth. We often go to sites where we're having to have a look and see if there's anything there, and it turns out there isn't anything there, and we find absolutely nothing at all. And I could have easily done a half an hour to an hour talk on just pictures of trenches with absolutely nothing in them whatsoever. But to get to some real archaeology, you know, every once in a while you do find something quite important and quite exciting. Some of you will have worked out what this is already, and some of you probably know where this is already, just from that one photograph. But we did a whole series of bits of work at Elsworth at Jack Hill, where they're building some new housing. And new housing is one of the major places where we're working at the minute, because at the moment, as I'm sure you're all aware, there's new housing projects being flung up absolutely everywhere. And obviously, every time that's done, they have to have some sort of archaeological assessment. And it's something that a lot of the time you're not even aware of that it's happening, because it's happening quietly. People aren't finding a lot, or if they are, it isn't anything groundbreakingly exciting. Or more often than not, the clients aren't really that keen on you telling everybody about what you found until they're well finished and the houses are built. Especially in cases like this, where if you find human remains on the site, they don't really want it advertised before the houses are being sold, because no one wants to live in a haunted burial ground. Like in Poltergeist. But this one was a bit more, well, I say unexpected. It was unexpected and expected at the same time. This was a housing estate just off Jack Hill, which is coming into Elsworth, and you know where Jack Hill is, it's right on the bend. You'll see the new houses, or they had to bury them quite a long way into the ground as part of the planning conditions. So they're quite set down, so they weren't too obstructive, too obvious on the landscape. And the sole reason we were there, really, we did a series of evaluation trenches to see if there's anything there, was primarily because another Bronze Age cremation cemetery had been found about 15 years earlier, just up the road, about 500 metres away, on another housing estate. That one I'd actually worked on in about 2001, and the initial phase of work, they dug 99. Or some ridiculous number of evaluation trenches. I can't remember now. Evaluation trench is literally just where we dig a trench with a machine, we strip the topsoil off, we get the machine to do all the work, and we see if anything turns up, basically. On the original phase of work, they dug something like 99 trenches. The very first trench, virtually the first bucketful, they found these Bronze Age cremations. And you think, well, the chances of that are so slim, it's ridiculous. And not only that, but when you actually see the report, where the trenches were, a few metres to the side was a huge concrete dew pond. So if they put the trench there, they would have hit this dew pond and assumed there was nothing there. As it happened, by complete fluke, they put the trench in just the right place and hit these cremations. We come to look at this site. I think we put 10 or 11 trenches in, so not very many. It wasn't as big a site. Literally the first trench, virtually the first bucketful, we hit Bronze Age cremations. So there's something weird going on in Elsworth. All this is just normal everywhere. But that's two Bronze Age cremation cemeteries of similar size that have been found in Elsworth within half a kilometre of each other. So there's something interesting going on in Elsworth. Definitely, it's a real, hotspot of Bronze Age kind of burial activity, one way or another. Now, of course, these cremations, they weren't associated with any kind of burial mound. There was no standing stones. There was nothing there to indicate they were even there, and there was nothing there to protect them. So as you can see, you can just about see in this photograph, this is us just working away, excavating, and you can just about see the top of the one in the middle that's not covered up. It's very jagged and battered. And the point is that these have been in the ground, but then the field had been ploughed repeatedly over a long period of time. And obviously every time the plough went over it, if it went a bit too deep, it took a bit more of the top of the urns off. And so most of these urns had, the entire bottom or top removed by years and years of ploughing. Some of them were upside down, some of them the right way up. One of them was kind of fully intact. There always seems to be a bit of a variation between which way around these things are put to the ground. Sometimes they're tips upside down, sometimes the right way up. Some of them were literally just the base because they'd been so badly eroded by ploughing, there was virtually nothing left. Other ones were pretty reasonably intact. And obviously what we did is excavate every single one, excavate around it. We wrapped plaster bandages like you get from, well, we wrapped cling film around them, then we wrapped plaster bandages like you use on a broken arm around them, and then we block lifted them in one piece and sent them off to a conservation lab in York to be fully excavated and cleaned, and they took out the interiors spit by spit, so in 10 centimetre spits down each one where they were intact enough. The amazing thing about buying plaster bandages is that you can't just go into a shop and buy plaster bandages. I mean, even Boots don't just sell plaster bandages over the counter. So we had to go and order several packs of plaster bandages because we needed quite a lot of them to do this. And the irony was it was April, so it was lambing time. And my partner at the time went into Boots and said, "Oh, we've ordered some plaster bandages." And they said, "Are you the farmer or are you the archaeologist?" Because obviously the farmers were all going in and buying them for their lambs, because they have to occasionally get lambs that break a leg and they have to quickly plaster them up to get them back out again. So we were kind of almost fighting with the farmer over who got these plaster bandages first, because we kind of needed them desperately to get back on the site, and obviously he needed them to get his lambs fixed. So you never would imagine that you'd need, there'd be a demand or a run on plaster bandages. But there you go. So that just shows the remains as we excavated them. And I took this picture in particular a couple of times at different points because there were three in a line that looked really they were some of the best preserved ones and looked really obvious together. Which I think is these three here, 4, 5, and 6 in this drawing. And again, all of this has been written up and published with nice drawings done by my colleague. We got a full set of carbon dates for the entire site. As you'll see, there's that's our initial trench. So that's our initial trench that we found them in. We actually missed number 4 from the original evaluation because it was right inside the trench. We didn't even see it. And then we went back and excavated it. We found there was 11 in that group. And then when they actually stripped more of the site, we actually found 2 more outliers, 12 and 13 there, which were just little pits with charcoal in. And the thing about Bronze Age cremations is that a lot of the time, all you find is little pits with burnt bone and charcoal in, and no pot, no anything, and nothing else like that. And so it seems like a lot of the time these burials were just deposited in bags or some sort of container, that was fabric that would decay over time. Only a few of them were actually put in pots, and obviously not all of them survived. Number 1 there, you'll see on the plan, was only a tiny piece of an urn left, very, very little left at all. And yeah, we got a suite of carbon dates, all of which came out as fairly early Bronze Age. I'm trying to remember exactly what dates they were, but all fairly consistent and all fitting in quite well with the ones that were found up the road, which were similar in style. And typically these the intact ones are these large urns with collars around the top. And again, you can see there how much has been lost because of where they've been ploughed across the tops over and over and over again. And a few pieces that were actually inside one of the urns, these smaller pieces here were actually stuffed inside one of the other urns. And this little tiny pot was just in one of the pits. I think it was pit 8, which was just a huge deep pit, absolutely full of bone, charcoal and all kinds. And we also had a flint arrowhead from one of the cremations and other bits of pottery and like bones from a whole range of individuals, from adults, children, a whole kind of spectrum really, which tells us a huge amount about the way in which these burials were used, who was buried in them, the sort of status of the different people that were buried, and they weren't just sort of exclusively for one group of people or one age range or anything like that. It's difficult to tell if it originally had some sort of mound over it. We didn't find any evidence for that. It's possible it did have a mound and that's just been removed over time. And there's a huge debate about these kind of cemeteries, which tend to get referred to as flat cemeteries, because they're just found with nothing over the top of them and they are just flat. But I suspect most of them almost certainly had some sort of mound or cairn. And if it's a cairn, of course, it's very easy to remove a cairn. You just pick the stones up and throw them in the hedge. So it's possible that this was a cairn originally that had been removed over time and then it had been ploughed flat. And so you end up with this fake thing of a flat cemetery. So just to kind of finish off, and I've rattled through that rather quickly. I would like to say it was quite a lot of slides. All of these sites that we work on, they're all written up somewhere. There's a report for all of them. If you look on our website, if you just look up Greenlane Archaeology and you look at our website, we've got a little map on there that's interactive that you can click on, and you can, with where they're up to date, you can click on the actual report and read the actual report direct from the website, which is quite useful if you want to read any more about any of these things. Some of these ones are published. The more interesting ones get published. They're usually in the Cumberland and Westmoreland transactions. But this is, you know, a selection. We're up to nearly our 500th project now in 15 years. So we get through about 30 to 40 projects a year, which does vary from tiny things to like weeks of work. So they're all different. Nothing's ever the same one week to the next. And yeah, as you can see, it's not quite like a lot of the archaeology you see on TV. It's very varying, and it ranges a lot from one thing to another. And just to finish off, I'll give you a quote from a famous archaeologist work. 90% of an archaeologist's time is spent in the library. Myths can only be taken at face value. We do not follow maps of buried treasure, and X never marks the spot, which was said by Henry Walton Jones Jr. And some of you will probably realise that that's Indiana Jones, which is very, very appropriate and actually very correct for what archaeologists actually do. And he's far more accurate than you might think for a film archaeologist. I think that's my last slide.
Thanks, Dan. It's uncanny, the likeness.
Yeah. I haven't got the hat.
No, you should get
or the jacket.
One, really. Yeah. Thank you very much. So just a reminder for people that you can put your questions in the chat. If any of you have got questions for Dan from the contents of the last 45 minutes, it'd be great to hear from you all. I had a couple actually, Dan, just to kick off. Those cremation urns that you were showing there at the very end, what actually happened to them then? Where are they now? Did they end up in a museum? Or?
They're actually in Kendal Museum, those, yeah.
Right, okay.
I think they're on display. I haven't actually seen them since they went to the museum. So I think that they were going to put them on display. They were going to build a display case to specifically put them on display. Now, of course, the museum's had a lot of reorganising since then. So whether or not that happened, I'm not sure. But that was what was meant to happen. And at most of our sites, I mean, obviously, we don't find anything that's sort of museum worthy. So it often doesn't end up in the museum. Anything that is museum worthy, in theory, ends up in a museum. But the problem we've got is a real issue in this area is we haven't got enough museum space. I mean, Kendal Museum, we do a lot of work in Kendal Museum's collecting area, and they haven't got enough room to take anything else. So we've got boxes of finds from sites in Kendal that they can't take because they haven't got room to take them, which is a bit of an issue, really, because we're not supposed to store them long term. So, yeah. So
does that mean that you end up with a lot of finds in your garage or something?
Well, we've got them in our office, yeah. not quite in the garage, although it's not much different to a garage. But yeah, it is a problem because obviously when the idea of commercial work kind of came about in the 1990s and this idea that developers had to pay for these things, nobody really thought about what the implications of that were, which was that a lot of stuff was going to be found that ultimately should go into a museum, and there aren't enough museums to take it all. They haven't got the room and the money. So nobody was paying for museums and then museums cottoned on to the idea they could start charging fees to the archaeologists to include in their costs to pass on to the client to pay for the museum space. But even that's not enough, really. So, yeah. I mean, that's the thing about all this work is it's all paid for by the developers. It's all paid for by the clients, apart from one or two exceptions. So the developers are expected to pay for everything and they pay for all the finds processing and all the other work as well. So it doesn't, in theory, cost the taxpayer anything. And I gave a similar talk in Kendal once about work we've done in Kendal, and a very irate man stood up and said, "Who pays for all of this?" And I said, "Well, the clients do. You haven't paid for any of it. The taxpayer doesn't pay for any of it." And he was still insistent on asking how much it cost to build this particular site. And I had to say, "Well, it hasn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, So, yeah.
But we need more. We need more museums, or we just need more space in the museums.
Well, the museums need more storage space, basically. Yeah, that is the problem. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So, a couple of questions then that have come in. So, Mark Hatton, he says, "Can I ask about the Coniston copper mines dig? Did you find any evidence of early 17th century mine workings around that area?"
I think they got something from the 17th century, but not anything much earlier than that. I can't remember. I mean, I was only working there as a kind of digger, really, on the Time Team project. That is published, actually. That's published in the Cumberland Westmorland Antiquarian transactions as well. So it's from a few years ago. So you should be able to find the results of that.
Yeah. I've done a bit of Googling while you've been talking, and I certainly found the Cumberland and Westmorland transactions. I'm not quite sure. I think you can sort of download PDFs, can't you? But it looks like you can kind of order copies anyway.
Yeah, they've put them all online up to I think 10 years hence, if you like. Yeah.
So certainly, yes, there's access to some of the articles.
Yeah, and they're in the local libraries, so they've still got copies on the shelves in the libraries.
I posted a link to the steam corn mill article earlier on. So so go to your library. That's a really good plug, isn't it? Then you can actually access them all. So Beth asks, please can I ask, have you done any work around Morecambe and Heysham?
I don't think we have, but there has been work done around that area. I mean, obviously we're only one contractor and a fairly small contractor in an area that's got, in Lancaster you've got Oxford Archaeology North, one of the biggest companies in the country. Obviously up at Carlisle you've got Wardle Armstrong, part of one of the biggest companies in the country, and there's several other individuals and smaller organisations as well working in the area. I mean, the biggest job that's been done in the Morecambe Heysham area recently is the M6 Heysham Link Road. Which did turn up quite a lot of medieval and prehistoric archaeology, and that's available. That is published in a book as well now that you can obviously buy at great expense.
And has some of that made its way down to Lancaster Museum?
I would assume if it hasn't, that it would do eventually. Yeah. I don't know. Other than the same problems of storage and all the rest of it. Yeah.
So Beth then says, have you got the name of that book you've just mentioned?
Oh God, it's called. I can't think what it's called. It's the Bay Gateway is what they called the site. What's it called? I can't remember. I'd have to look it up and find it. I've got it on the shelf somewhere, but it's Oxford Archaeology North, and if you look for the heritage of the Bay Gateway, that'll probably find it.
Yeah.
You just search for that.
Great. It looks like Beth, you've given Beth enough information. Thank you. Yeah. Just going back to the other bit around, you can download these articles if you want to. From the website, but Bill Shannon, fellow Morecambe Bay Partnership trustee, who's done so many of our sort of best attended talks in the Sunset series, he points out the best way of getting all these papers is actually to join the Cumberland and Westmorland Antiquarian Society. So thank you, Bill. Good, that's a really good reminder. So thanks very much. And obviously Bill is oh God, Bill, can you post in the chat your current role there? I know you're a member. I think you're more important than that one, though, aren't you? I'm sure you'll tell us.
Who's the treasurer?
Treasurer, yeah. Good. Well, thank you.
Well, of course, the issue with Morecambe Bay, of course, is that we in Lancashire and Cumbria, the Cumbria stuff is very well covered in the Cumberland Westmorland Antiquarian Society. For the Lancashire side, there's stuff in the Lancaster Archaeology and History Society's journal, and then there's also the county journal, but the county journal doesn't have quite as much archaeology in it, so you tend to be looking a little bit in terms of smaller published work. But there's plenty of reports. If you want to read unpublished reports, there's loads of them out there. And the other place to look as well is the Archaeology Data Service Oasis project, which is where most of the reports end up. Which is, there's thousands of reports on there. So
okay. Good, yeah. So thank you, Bill. I knew you were more than that. So not just treasurer, vice president. There you go. Dan. So thanks, Bill. Yeah. So join. I think that's a really good idea if you're interested in getting a hold of more of this. Really fascinating information. And I thought you did really live up actually to the spirit of Heritage Open Day in terms of actually giving us access to buildings that we wouldn't normally be able to get to. In this case, obviously photographically, but
some of them aren't there anymore, so you can't.
I know it's amazing, but I have driven past that octagonal summer house on Dalton Gate, and that is really interesting. That is particularly interesting when it's not even what it says on the tin on the outside. Good. So we've got a couple more questions here. So Sarah asks, who owns the finds that you make? Do they belong to the developer?
For any finds apart from treasure technically belong to the landowner. So in some cases, yes, it's a developer. Although some of these things are so obscure, you don't even know who the landowner even is, because it's all these funds that are paying for one thing, and the developer's just a kind of front for it anyway. But obviously, if it goes to the museum, we have to kind of get that legally signed over to the museum, and then it belongs to the museum. But yeah, there's plenty of finds where nobody wants them. Basically, the museums don't want them.
Yeah.
We end up with lumbered with them. We end up having to throw things away that aren't of any interest, So, but legally, anything like that belongs to the landowner unless it's treasure, in which case it goes through treasure trove.
Yeah. And what's the technical legal definition of treasure then?
God, it changes all the time. I mean, it needs to be so much percentage gold or silver, a group of coins over, I can't remember, a certain age. Now they've changed it to a group of metalwork over so many years, such an age. It's quite complicated. But I mean, usually it's your obvious things like collections of coins, gold and silver, over more than, I can't remember if it's 100 years or 200 years old. I mean, I so rarely find it that it doesn't really, I don't even know what the rules are. So I think I found one thing that counted as treasure once in my entire career.
What was that then?
That was a silver ring hidden in Skipton when we were working in Skipton. And that we actually had to fill out the treasure. And then the only time we ever came close, we found a piece of what we thought was silver in Lancaster. We filled out all the treasure forms for it, sent it off to the conservator to start doing conservation work, and they said, hang on, it's not even silver, it's pewter. So we had to cancel all the forms, cross them all out. So another question here. What are you working on at the moment, if you're allowed to say? Trying to think. We're doing some work on the old police station in Ulverston, which we're doing mainly building recording on that before that's redeveloped. We're doing some survey work for the Lowther estate up near Ascombe in Cumbria where they want to put some forestry stuff up. And again, lots of housing estates that are being proposed all over the place, just doing initial work on those, desk-based work and geophysics and things. I mean, there's so many of them now, it's hard to keep track, really. So.
This isn't a question, but it is a really nice comment, because I actually thought the same at that part of the talk. It's just someone, Karen, expressing love for the bricks.
Yeah.
And Barrow. They're sort of painstaking hand-drawn bricks. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So remind us of the name of the brickmaker.
William Gradwell. Yeah, who was the mayor at one time, and he ran a brickworks and a timber yard. And he basically, the Barrow's a bit of an odd one, because there was a sort of consortium of businessmen who virtually built everything of any importance, and they were all kind of friends with each other, and they were all connected one way or another. And William Gradwell got in with that group of businessmen, and then, funnily enough, got awarded all the contracts to supply the bricks and all. I mean, it's the sort of thing that it sounds so corrupt now. Well, I say it sounds corrupt now; it doesn't sound at all corrupt now.
Sounds relatively familiar, actually.
Sounds perfectly normal. Yeah, exactly. But I've always said that if you cut Barrow in half like a stick of rock, the name would be written down the middle wouldn't be Barrow-in-Furness, it'd be William Gradwell, because his name is on virtually every brick, and that's just the 6 that we found on site. It's an odd one, because brickmakers tend to have a mark, and they usually keep the same mark for quite a long time. William Gradwell's mark seems to have changed virtually every 5 years, which is unusual, because normally they keep one mark and it stays the same all the time. He kept changing all the time. And the other thing you notice about his bricks is a lot of them are really badly made as well, full of grit and really poor. And they fall apart.
Yep. Hopefully not like it was I can't remember which the bridge was in Italy that was where the mafia built it, didn't they? And then it all ended up falling apart.
A bit like that, like an industrial mafia.
Yeah. Yeah, who would have thought? Like, there's so much story in the bricks. That is fantastic. Wendy also, she says if the toll house panel is incorrect, is it the city council that put them up? And she said that she knows a panel in Preston that's also wrong. So the question really is, if you see them and you know them to be incorrect, who do you report them to?
Just take a chisel and knock them off. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, Ulverston's only got a town council. I don't actually know who's responsible for putting them up in the first place. I think the information came from the old Civic Society / Heritage Centre, or some members of it. And I assume there was some sort of funding organised with the town council. And then the irony is that they've currently been refurbishing them all and repainting them all.
Yeah.
But no one's done anything about anything that's inaccurate. So, and that one seems to be spectacularly inaccurate. So, yes, I don't know. I'll just cover it over with another one.
Yeah. Great. So we've got the love for bricks is carrying on, Dan. So we've got more mentions of finding bricks in their gardens, and then there's a link here to the Bricks of Cumbria website. Thanks very much, Peter. That's brilliant. Great. Well, thank you very, very much, Dan. That really was a bit of a whistle stop, but I think it was all the better for that, actually, because it meant that we were really rapidly moving on from one location to another and actually getting, as I say, just glimpses into places that we wouldn't normally be able to get access to, and or that have just not there anymore. And I mean, Barrow in particular has just got such an incredible history. It's really, really just immense, I think, when you go around and you look at some of those old buildings. So thank you very much indeed. So I've seen some thumbs up already, but you can either do it electronically or just do it like this. But thank you very, very much from us all. Thanks so much for joining, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.